What do we call this then? We call it a canvas. And what's a canvas? Tune in next time to find out. Thanks for watching. Ho ho ho, Merry Christmas. The canvas is a structural piece that goes in between the front of the jacket and the lining. Its job is to help the jacket front maintain a certain form and shapeliness, sort of help it avoid getting too easily wrinkled, particularly around the chest, hence this particular piece. And yeah, it helps the front of the jacket be more of a three-dimensional, stable panel that's going to then fit around and drape over the wearer's body in a cleaner, better defined fashion. Typically these are made with a host of weird and wonderful materials. There's really about as much hand sewing to do as you could ever hope to have on your plate. In short, I'm in heaven, or at least I was before I finished them. I suppose I still have to attach this one, so fun's not over yet. Anyway, this is going to be really a crucial part of the jacket that's going to be a part of my wedding suit. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, I had problems with my last jacket attaining that kind of structure across the front. That was the first time I made a canvas like this. The only thing is I wasn't really using the right materials, and certainly now having made one with the right materials, I can see how much structure was lacking, particularly around the chest area. So I was really very thrilled to get my hand on the correct materials for this sort of thing. Again, just a quick note about this. If you're kind of going along with your own jacket construction in tandem with these videos, obviously you can follow along and make it exactly as I'm making it. I'm doing so according to the instructions in this book, Classic Tailoring Techniques for Menswear. Indeed, most of the construction of these suit altogether, I'm kind of pretty much following what's in this book, although I have a couple of other resources as well. I'll go through in a second exactly what materials you would need. Then again, you can use substitutes. I'll give some more precise suggestions as to which substitutes you might want to use as and when I'm introducing all of these delightful fabrics. Let's get on with it.
So this is the main canvas piece. Normally it'd be made with wool interfacing. This is sort of 50% wool and then a bit of cotton and then a small amount of synthetic fibre. I think if you can't find this precise thing, I'd go with maybe like a muslin, like the kind of calico thing that you might make a toile out of, and the weight would then depend on the weight of your garment fabric. And this fabric I just soaked in cold water for a few hours and then hung to drip dry, and then once it was dried, sort of just pressed it gently with a little bit of steam. Anyway, let's put this together. Right, so point 1 is 7.5 centimetres up from that top dart point. And then your second point is going to be 2 centimetres towards the side seam away from the dart point nearest to the jacket front, but... Yep, so what I do next is measure 6.5 centimetres, again, into the side seam from point 2, and that's point 3. If you're doing it correctly, that point will be ever so slightly above where I've drawn it because the line will be at a slight angle. Point 4 then comes between points 2 and 3 at a distance from point 2 that is equal to the entire width of the dart at the widest point plus 0.5 centimetres. So then you draw a line between points 1 and 4, and again, then at this sort of right angle from that line, you kick out again towards the side seam, and that's also that distance of 6.5 centimetres. And then once you've done that, you sort of draw that curved line, which for some reason I didn't film, from point 5 up to the bottom of the armhole, and then likewise from point 3 down to the hem, and that's going to sort of straighten out at the towards the bottom, towards the hem. And then yeah, so you then will end up with this. So yeah, that line I should have drawn right at the start, but I just didn't because I'm an idiot. And you're going to end up with that being a sort of gap in between of everything there. And then when you cut it out, you will, as you'll see in a second, cut that little wedge in the middle away, and you'll have basically a gap, and you'll close that gap then to create body like a normal dart. So speaking of, so just mark the wrong side of each piece with an X because there's kind of no official wrong side. Speaking of wedges, you cut out 2 of these little wedges, and you'll see what we'll need them for in a second. So according to those dimensions there on the screen. So next we're going to be cutting out the plastron pieces. I'm going to be using the piece I made with my toile in an earlier episode, but there's measurements on the screen if you want to make your own. And this fabric is hair cloth. So normally it's sort of a mix of horsehair and cotton. I think in my case it's like a small amount of horsehair and then some synthetic cotton. But the idea is it's just a sort of heavy, relatively stiff fabric that's going to add a certain structure in the chest. If you can't get a hold of this, I would recommend maybe a sort of heavy linen, but maybe also like sort of heavyish cotton canvas. So this is going to be a roughly matching piece designed to protect the body against the prickly hair cloth, but it's meant to be 1.3 centimeters larger, not the exact same size. I screwed up, no big deal. Ideally this would be wool flannel, so a nice soft thick fabric. I don't have that, I'm just using pocketing, so plain black cotton essentially. It's all good. Yep, so you measure the thirds and you snip in to the one nearest to the collar, and then you put that wedge in, you spread it out and you top stitch it. The wedge is going to be on the wrong side, but yeah, you top stitch it on like that. And again, it's kind of like with a dart almost, it's like opening it out, so there's going to be a little bit of shape in the piece Yeah, so like that. And here again, we're now closing these pieces that we sort of cut out before to again create that shape. So you just get some strips that are long enough to cover, and they can be way wider than this. I don't know why I went so narrow, it just made my life difficult, but you know, I seem to like doing that. And yeah, you'll just get a, again on the wrong side, top stitch those on in place to secure that, that sort of open wedge shape closed. So both on that long one and then on the shorter one on the side. Yeah, but so once you've top stitched it, you'll then actually get a zigzag across to secure it. My machine actually only does a very narrow zigzag, so it didn't work too well. It looks kind of like something out of a horror film, but you know, it roughly worked. Yeah, so that's that done. And then again, we're going to kind of create this dart in the main plastron piece itself. And again, it's just going to have that effect of creating a bit of three-dimensionality, if that's a word, within that chest piece, which, you know, it's kind of what these garments are all about, basically. You know, it's about being 3D, not 2D. Yeah, I wasn't very happy with this. Again, it's because my zigzag stitch was too small. So I just cross-stitched it, that hand stitch from the last episode. And again, it just goes to show your hand stitches, they're like Swiss Army knives, you know, they'll come out and you can throw them at whatever problem you can't solve and they'll save the day. Yep, so just trimming it at the top there, and again, trimming away this excess at the armhole, because obviously we don't want that there. I know I love a high armhole, but that really would be ridiculous. Yep, and then so just two more snips, again, just to allow a little bit of mobility. And so this is collar linen. This is the same stuff I used to make the collar in my toile episode. It's very stiff. You probably can find this or something like it, but just go for any fabric that kind of has a sort of cardboardy texture, essentially. And that really does just secure the fabric up beneath the shoulder. Yep, so this is me trying to compensate for the fact that my pocketing piece wasn't as large as it was supposed to be. So I'm just, yeah, basically gluing on fake bits of little scraps of fabric. And yeah, always happens whenever I turn on the camera, the thread just flies right out of the needle. But yeah, so we've just basted all those layers together, and then again, we're just going to trim that excess away from the canvas piece, so it's all nicely lined up and as it should be. But now a quick word from Real Pat.
So just want to have a very brief interlude to talk about this next stitch that I'm going to be using, because it's integral to the construction of the canvas specifically, and it's also going to come in handy later when we make the collar. And that is the pad stitch. So if you see those sort of white crisscrossy stitches there, that's how it looks on the other side, is to join together two or more layers of fabric that are lying on top of each other consistently over the entire area of that garment. And as I say, it's a really important stitch for the construction of the canvas, and it's also just a really handy stitch, I think, to have in your arsenal as far as hand stitches are concerned. So yeah, let me show you how to do it.
Right, so you're going to start, well, either top or bottom, it kind of doesn't really matter, and you're going to take horizontal stitches and then move down. Let's say you start at the top, and then horizontal stitch down, and then when you get to the bottom and it's time to move across, you just sort of back stitch on the point you've come out at, like I'm about to do, and then you take another step over to the left or the right if you're, you know, working the other direction if you're left-handed, and then yeah, you keep going. And I love this stitch, it's so useful. I love it almost as much as when people like the video and subscribe. So please, if I may ask, do that if you haven't already. So we're going to use this stitch to properly secure all those different layers of the plastron to the canvas. But first we need to mark out the area we're going to do. So that's just according to these measurements. So you're leaving a bit at the top and you're curving into the armhole. And then you're also just tracing along the bottom of the flannel there. So you're not making unnecessary stitches essentially. And you still want it to be free at the very top towards the shoulder. And yeah, I hope you love being super relaxed and just entering a Zen state, because that is how I feel doing this stuff. It's just so relaxing. It takes ages, I won't lie, but you know, put on some music, have a blast. Yeah, so these stitches, you want them to be a bit loose. You don't want them to be super tight or it's going to pucker. Because this is going to be an internal stitch, it doesn't matter, you know, they can be a little bit longer. They can be sort of 1.5 to 2 centimeters, and the actual, you know, the scoopy stitch that you take, so what's going to appear on the other side, that can also be on the larger side. It's not a big deal. But yeah, this is just going to make sure that that plastron is fully attached across its whole area to the canvas and not just, say, around the edges. And it's going to have a sort of element still of mobility and independence from the canvas, but, you know, still be tied to it in a fundamental way. And yeah, so you start halfway along and work first towards the roll line. And then once you get to the roll line, you sort of flip it and work the other direction. And again, where you start, which side you start from, depends on whether you're right-handed or left-handed, and also which side of the jacket you're doing, if you're doing the left panel canvas or the right one. Yeah, and that's kind of how it looks like on the other side. Yeah, so I just cross stitched that bit that I sort of fakely added on there just to keep it secure. Again, love a cross stitch. And yeah, and we're just securing the very edges of the flannel now to the canvas as well. So this is just basically you scoop into the canvas right by the edge and then back up through the bottom of the flannel and out again. So it's just a slip stitch basically, if you want to call it something. And again, it's a lot of hand sewing. Not everyone's into that for all sorts of reasons, and that's cool. I do find that once you've kind of gotten to the end of this, you're just extra satisfied with everything you've done. And the pad stitching, in particular, I just adore. Right, so it's time to put these pieces together now. So you lay the canvas piece down with the flannel side facing down. And then, yeah, you lay the piece on top very exactly. You can use the roll line to orient. If you haven't got inlay, which I do, you're going to see that extra 1.3 centimeters that you drew around your pattern at the start poking out, and you can orient that way. I don't have that, so it's a bit fiddlier. Also, the dart of the jacket and the dart of the canvas should be offset by about 1.5 to 2 centimeters. But yeah, the roll line is a useful way to orient if you are using inlay as well. Great, so then we're just going to take loose and large basting stitches in these various points. I'm going to go through them on the screen. But what you also want to do is make sure that you're being very gentle with how you're handling it, because it's very important that these panels, both the front panel and the canvas, are correctly aligned with each other, particularly as far as the direction of the grain is concerned. And so you also want to be smoothing the garment down as you baste in the direction you're basting. Yep, so you do that first main stitch, and then you fold over the front edge of the jacket to expose those pocket edges, and then you slip stitch them in as we did with the edge of the flannel a minute ago. And that's just going to give the canvas piece a secure connection to the jacket, because those stitches are actually going to stay in, whereas these other basting stitches we're doing are going to come out at the end of the jacket construction. So then just along the waistline level to 2.5 centimeters away from the cutting edge of your jacket panel. In my case, there's also the extra 2.5 centimeters of inlay, so it's 5 centimeters. For some reason, I didn't film a stitch. You can see that other one which goes halfway along that waistline stitch and down towards the hem, and then this one from the end of that waistline stitch down across the front of the jacket and along the bottom of the hem to the end of the canvas. And again, you're always sort of smoothing the jacket out in the direction you're doing. Yeah, so this stitch was also meant to start at that midpoint along the waistline level, not from the end point, but what's the worst thing that can happen? And so that one starts from that sort of waistline point at the front of the jacket, moves up to the roll line, and then goes along the roll line. So there's still a little bit of space there at the very front of the jacket for the rest of the construction, because we don't want it to be right on the cutting edge of the panel or something like that. Yep, so as before, we're folding over the panel to expose the welt pocket edge on the other side, and we're just slip stitching that in again. And as before, it's just going to secure the canvas properly to the jacket front. But the other hip pocket, that doesn't cross over the canvas, so we don't need to worry about that there. Yep, and then this sort of longer stitch moving sort of across the whole jacket, following the contours of the canvas underneath. Yeah, as described with my very helpful text on screen. And yeah, I don't know how, but I didn't get the footage of it, me finishing it, but you know, you just carry on down to the bottom of the pocket there, through the pocket. Yeah, so I'm filming the next day now. And yeah, and then lastly, just along the actual curved part of the armhole, make sure it's not too far in, but far enough in that it's not going to get in the way of the seam allowance. Yeah, and then you're just trimming any excess around the cutting edge of your pieces. Again, in my case, I have this extra inlay, so I need to be quite exact about how I'm measuring that, because the inlay actually extends over the canvas. But if you haven't added inlay, you should see the canvas sticking out from underneath your pieces, and just cut it away, to make that all match up. So yeah, check for ripples. Ideally, there shouldn't be any, or at least in my case, no major ones. And now we are preparing for the coup de grace, my favourite part, pad stitching the lapels. So we're just marking on our seam allowance, so in my case 1 centimetre, on the inside of the canvas on the lapel. And then you're laying it on a table so that the roll line is sort of going along the edge of your table, and the lapel is hanging off the table. And that's going to allow the lapel to assume a very natural sort of roll. It's going to sort of give itself a bit of that rolled over shape that is eventually going to be in the jacket. Yeah, so ideally, obviously a fabric matching thread colour, so in my case just black. This is silk thread, and then I've used some beeswax there just to stiffen it so it won't tangle up so easily. It's a really useful resource that it saved my bacon doing this. And then it's that same pad stitch. In this case, the stitches are shorter, they're more like 1 centimetre, and you really want to try and get just like tiny points That one wasn't very good, for instance. That was a bit too big. And one way to do this is really just to sort of poke the needle directly down and then kind of turn it up quite sharply and really see if you can just take sort of a few threads. It's going to make sure that on the other side of the lapel, on the garment fabric side, it really is just tiny pinpricks, and that's what you want. But bear in mind also that the side of the lapel on which those pinpricks are going to be is going to be the underside of the lapel. So it's visible technically, but it's never actually going to be showing. So yeah, anyway, so we're going first along, starting at the roll line and working into the lapel. And once we're about 4 centimeters in, we take it off from that position where it's hanging off the table. We have it then folded over on the table in the position it's actually going to have in the finished jacket. And then we're going to carry on working like that. And again, it's just going to encourage the lapel, especially with that wool canvas, especially which, if it is wool, it's going to be very amenable to taking on these sort of naturally encouraged shapes. And yeah, it's just going to encourage it to have this nice, elegant, rolled lapel effect rather than, say, we're going to have to later on really sharply press it in, which doesn't look quite as elegant. So yeah, this took like 90 minutes probably, but I thought I would give you the abridged version. 90 of the happiest minutes of my life, I'll tell you that for free. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I feel emotional watching this. So yeah, you can see there just those sort of tiny pinpricks. You can see a few sort of strands of the canvas fibres poking through. Again, it's not a problem. No one's actually going to be seeing that underside of the lapel. And yeah, and that's it. That's the kind of finished canvas attachment. So then just on the canvas side, we're going to press the top 2/3 of the lapel. So not that bottom bit. We want that nice natural roll to stay. And then you'll just reflect on the good times you've had.
There we have it, hand sewn canvas. What a thrill. Next we'll be putting the facings on the lapels and generally rounding off the lapels, both literally and figuratively. Till then we're done. Have a good one and happy holidays.